streaming. Can you just give me the okay once that happens?
We are streaming now, and we're now recording. You're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This is the NIAA Rules, Regulations, and Policy Committee meeting. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order at 8:03. All right, I'm going to take roll. So if you could just say here or present as I go through roll call, be great. Reggie Farmer, Di Frederick, Tammy Habig, I saw Tammy. Are you there?
Here.
There we go. Ryan Sins, Jerome Reamer,
Here.
Jim Pace,
Here.
Jonathan Grandy,
Here.
Pamela Sloan,
Here.
Rollins Stallworth, myself, Tim Jackson,
Here.
Lori Lotz, here for the staff, and Paul Anderson.
Here.
Okay. We also have a guest here. It looks like she's going to hop out and back in. Heidi Torix from Eastern Sierra United School District. She's going to be speaking on co-op, so she is a guest here to speak on that. Okay. At this time, we're going to do public comment. So this time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that that person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. Members of the public who have submitted public comment by email will have their email read into the record. A limit of 3 minutes per person and or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are deemed to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. So at this time, there is nobody that has emailed me any public comment. Is there anybody in the office, in the NIA office?
There is not.
Or Dia? Okay, thank you. Anybody in anybody else's office or email wishing to participate in public comment? Okay, we will move on to number 4. Approval of the August 22nd, 2024 meeting agenda for possible action. So I'm just looking for a motion and a second regarding our agenda for this meeting. And if I could just ask that it's flexible in case our guest is not able to speak at the time she needs to speak, or we need to kind of switch things around for any reason.
This is Pam. I'll make a motion to approve the May. We're doing number 4, correct?
Yep. Meeting agenda.
All right. Okay. The approval for the May 14th meeting agenda.
August number 4, August 22nd.
All right. What am I looking at? Okay. I make a motion that we approve the minutes for today, that we have a flexible agenda.
Looking for a second.
I will second it, Jim Pace.
Thank you.
Okay, you need a vote.
So a vote for the approval of the August 22nd, 2024 meeting agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Okay, that motion passes. Make sure. Okay, moving on to item number 5, approval of the May 14th, 2024 meeting minutes for possible action. Looking for a motion to approve last meeting's minute.
This is Pam again. I will make a motion to approve the May 14th, 2024 meeting minutes.
Thank you, Pam. Looking for a second.
Jim Pace will second it.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, all in favor of the approval for the meeting minutes from May 14, 2024, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay. Minutes are approved. So if you kind of just take a look through the minutes, if hopefully you've reviewed those, kind of outlines a little bit of what we'll talk about today, but our last meeting was several months ago. So I just need to wrap up a few items from that meeting that we'll talk about today. But before we get into that, item number 6, I did just want to review the Board of Control approved regulations and where they are at. So this is just for discussion. So if you take a look at page 8 of the packet, you'll see a list of all of the regulations that we had approved in our committee and sent to the Board of Control in June for their meeting. Most of all of these here have been approved. Many of them have already come back from the LCB, so they're in the process of going back to the board for final approval. So I just wanted to list those out for you to see where we were at. Next to item 11, 12, and 13 on this list is those were ones that we were removing. And so I just put a note there so that you knew that those were being removed. The rest of them were either brand new regulations, as I put new in front of it, or they were updates to current regulations that we have. So this is just really for us to take a look at. Anybody have any questions or any discussion regarding this item for review? Okay, if there is no discussion, again, this is really just kind of a heads up for everybody in the committee to see where we're at with those that we had already sent. We're going to move on to item number 7, which are the possible Nevada administrative codes that we are looking to possibly change. And this is for possible action. So we will decide, as a group, if we want to move forward with any of these regulations. Some of them are coming back from our last meeting. Some are coming back from the board. And then co-ops, the first one, A, is coming back from superintendent from Eastern Sierra United School District, and she is here to speak on this. And what I've included in the packet was just language we've looked at before that was initially put together by Donnie Nelson and sent to us last year. I know this topic has come up a couple times, both at the board and at our committee, but I did speak with Heidi, and she would like to speak a little bit on this item and just give some input for us to discuss and possibly take action on if we would like to move forward with anything regarding this type of situation for our schools. So Heidi, I will allow you to chime in if you would like to speak on this at all to the committee. If you're here and can speak.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We got you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know what's going on with my internet at home. So anyway, well, thanks for allowing me to join. So I'm not sure, was everybody in attendance at the meeting in Vegas last fall, or is this kind of new to anyone? This whole discussion of co-op. Maybe Tim, you might know a little better, but or I can just kind of dive in. So I came
were probably
to
listening in.
Okay, good.
But some may.
Okay, great. So yeah, I came to speak with my son and a board member football coach last fall. And really, I mean, our whole goal is just to have our students be able to play. And so possibly to join with another school district within NIAA who also isn't able to field a team. So we were speaking at that moment. I mean, my son was there as a football player, just to talk as a student athlete. But our goal was, our hope is that this wouldn't just be, specific to football, that it would pertain if the board would move forward, and obviously this committee decides to have more discussion, if you all do, to have this pertain to all sports, and all sports where a school isn't able to field a team. And then in that case, just kind of our thought is that we would get approval through the executive director to work with another school district, and then it would be up to the two districts to decide, whose field are we going to play at, kind of what is that going to look like. And then what we had proposed is again, the goal just being that kids don't skip a year in playing, so they get the play time, and they're not out of shape. All the things it's rough on our boys right now. They didn't have a football team last year, and they're scrimmaging now, and they're out there doing a great job. But it's given them a go since they didn't have any kind of action really last year. But anyway, our goal was just to be able to have the possibility for districts to have the possibility of a co-op, and not even to take it to playoffs, right? Because I feel like that might muddy the waters a little bit, and maybe this committee decides that that's not something that we need to entertain that. But really, when we said, and when I spoke with Donnie, and we even met with my board member, and I met with Tim. So thanks for that time to meet with you, Tim, and we kind of gave him our thoughts on this, and really the seriousness that we feel how it's impacting our districts in Northern Nevada. So we just are hoping that we can that the board can find a way to implement some policy that just allows for that opportunity for kids to play. So I just found out this last week that us at Eastern Sierra, CHS, are barely fielding a team with 10 kids. Two more signed up this week, so we were really ecstatic about that. But Smith Valley doesn't have a team again, and I know Vic spoke against it, and that's fine. This isn't like an agreement that districts have to work together. It just, if they want to, would be the ideal, right? And I believe Whittle also doesn't have a team. Sierra Lutheran, they just folded their team. And so these are all kind of examples of districts for us in particular that, would be a great opportunity for us to make some sort of set an agreement, if this was allowable by NIAA, to be able to have a team if we didn't have, if one of our kids did get hurt and we didn't have a team, or whatever the case may be, which was our position last year. So, that's kind of that's it in a nutshell, but I'm happy to, move forward with discussion if you guys are willing to. My thought was, maybe, I could bring to you guys attendance numbers also, attendance numbers of Eastern Sierra, because Eastern Sierra didn't have baseball. I've been here, this is my 6th year. So I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, didn't have baseball. Then baseball was brought back. And really just kind of looking at our smaller rural / frontier school districts, and what do their numbers look like, and then how does that obviously correlate to their team numbers? I'm not sure if that would be something that would be helpful. I would absolutely be willing to dive in and do some of that work, and submit that to the committee. So I'm just kind of looking for some direction from you guys to make this palatable for people if it's not.
Thank you, Heidi. We'll open it up for some discussion regarding this. Questions, comments, anybody's thoughts on this, additional information that might be beneficial for us to possibly make a determination on whether or not we want to see this as something that moves forward.
Kate, does anyone have the history from, I know Donnie's not here now, and does anyone out there on this committee have any history with previous co-op programs in the state, and what has been done in the past regarding this?
Rollins, this is Paul Anderson. I don't think we've ever had co-ops, but they have existed in other state associations where there's rural communities, and the same issues that are being discussed here arise, where there's not enough kids at one particular school or a couple of schools, but combined there are, and they're allowed to form a co-op team.
And is the issue here of not allowing that, is the objection of the league of that team not being able to participate in postseason play? Or is that because the people who are wanting to do the co-op programs can't participate in co-op state championships and that kind of thing, and that kind of throws a loop there? Would that be a situation where if we did say sponsor or support a co-op situation, that they would not be able to play in postseason play, and that we are accomplishing the goal of having those kids in two programs, or maybe one that would, in normal circumstances, not be able to play, to at least play, which is the goal. The goal is not to go to the playoffs and win a state championship. The goal is to get these kids to play. It's my understanding that there was some conversation up north about the possibility of Waddell's kids going to Douglas to play for Douglas's football team. And I think the Waddell people were real enthusiastic. If I remember correctly, they were somewhat enthusiastic about their low number of boys being able to go to Douglas and play at Douglas High School. The problem is that Douglas did not want them to come, based on the fact that if they would have accepted the Waddell kids, that they couldn't have played postseason play. So you had one school willing to go, and you had the other school that they were going to go to. I believe they're in the same district, that they didn't want them there because they hindered that school's opportunity and chance to play postseason. So that's kind of my history of it being on this board for the last 9 years. Tammy, you remember that too? Is that kind of fairly, I see you shaking your head. Is that
Yeah,
what you remember as well?
I remember the conversations, and I remember majority of people that opposed it. Because like I said, I have a hard time weighing in on something like this because it's such a, we don't experience it at all. But I know that the people that were opposed to it, and I was one that I was like, you know what, as long as they can't qualify for postseason, go for it. And I think that was kind of the consensus. And I know that we were talking about, like you said, that Douglas, it had to be an agreement between both teams. And I think if we just maybe put into words, we're gonna have to have someone smarter than me draw it up and put in there that I think as long as they don't qualify for postseason play, I think majority of people were fine with it.
Yes, exactly. That was my feeling as well.
Tim, do you want to chime in? See your hand up.
Yeah, I met with the staff. It was a very productive meeting. I brought up a couple other concerns and some positives as well. There is history of this, Rollins, in large urban districts. If you were to look at St. Louis Public School District, they have, I want to say 6 high schools within their system, maybe more. That's off the cuff answer. But they have certain schools that are identified as tennis plays at this school, baseball is at this school, and that they ran into their issues when they took away or tried to consolidate, if you will, or co-op certain programs that carried with it other aspects. For example, who gets homecoming? Who gets senior night?
Yeah.
Who hosts the games? And we discussed all those, just those types of topics. The other thing was, and I will go to the postseason question too. My concern with the postseason would be this: we would be allowing a team to participate as a co-op, but taking away the postseason. So in other words, we're saying, yeah, you're good enough to play as a team, but you're not good enough to participate in the postseason. I have a tough time wrapping my head around that. The other thing we discussed also was a concern that perhaps if this were brought forward without limitations, and that's what I'm asking, to not say that I'm for or against in any way, shape, or form. What I'm saying is, if it was brought in without limitations, I can see the potential of manipulation within an area where you're closer to each other. In other words, I'm going to pick on John because he's sitting right there. I can see his face on my screen. He's the first one. That John and Tammy's schools happen to be right next door to each other, and they decide, you know what, we're going to take on football, and you're going to take on basketball, and we just cut down on the number of sports we have to cover on a given night, and that the negativity that could come from that of perhaps becoming, and we've seen this before with schools coming in as new members, as becoming a one sport wonder powerhouse.
Yep.
So I think that's a very important and poignant conversation that needs to be had. So I've seen this work. I've seen this fail. I've seen this in different manifestations that have come out. So with that, I wanted to thank Heidi, that conversation was great. We had a long conversation about it. But if there's any other questions, I'll chime in, but thank you.
Can I answer or because Tim, we talked about this a little bit, and actually specifically homecoming just got brought up in my district because we do have 2 high schools, but they don't play together. One's like an hour away in CIS, so they're not relative to this at all. But we do try to bring our homecomings together as a district because we have 30 kids in one high school and 50 kids in another, and it just gets weird when you try to host a homecoming with 30 kids. It just doesn't really give the good vibe of a homecoming. So anyway, I feel like districts that are small and losing sports for the most part are already kind of, for lack of a better word, like desperate to even kind of have a program. So like we would be willing to give, right? Like if because I don't really, it's ideal to have a homecoming the day of and have your senior nights on your sporting events, but we already lost those. We've already experienced that. So, that's something, if we were at a space and time, and yes, we're not this year, but just knowing it could happen in the future and for other districts like ours, like I think if districts really truly are in it for for their kids to just be able to play, that they just know that they're sacrifices, and I also think, Tim, you bring up a good point about maybe districts that are close together wanting to say, hey, you take this one sport and you take this other sport. And I would just suggest to the committee that be something that maybe that's where you have the verbiage in there. If this policy does indeed go through, that the executive director has to do some overseeing of that. So then the districts have to, maybe we have to look at enrollment. I would propose that, we have to state obviously our numbers, the rationale, and then give Tim all of that information, because we have bubble groups, right? Like the freshman who just went into our high school at CHS is a pretty big group, but the group before that, there's going to be 2 kids and, there's no boys at all. So we'll probably be able to have girls teams, but not our boys teams. And so, I mean, it's so hard to fine tune all of that into policy that I would just advise, because my board does this with policy for our district, right? What's legal is legal, and we put in words. And then there is some discretion of the executive director / in my case, superintendent. So that might be helpful and address some of those things.
Hey, can I make a quick comment? I really think if we were to adopt this rule, and I think we should, but I think it should only apply to rural communities. I don't think there should be any application in metropolitan type communities, Las Vegas, Reno, Carson, Gardnerville, Elko, bigger schools like that. I just don't think it should apply, because the purpose of this is as we hear from the smaller schools, they can't control the number of kids that are enrolling as freshmen. There might be only 2 boys that enroll at a particular school as freshmen in a particular year, and that's going to affect whether or not you can field a football team or a baseball team or any team for the next 4 years, just depending on the enrollment that comes behind them. So and where I've seen it applied in the years that I've been representing the association, when we discussed it with other attorneys from other states, is primarily in that situation where it's just small communities that literally do not have the numbers to have a team on their own, and they're perhaps a couple of communities that are fairly close together that have the same situation, and it's an easy resolution. So anyway, that's just my thought. I don't think we should even begin to think about allowing it in a larger school district where we could have the situation, as Tim mentioned, where 2 large high schools of 3,000 students apiece get together and say, well, we'll take care of the football team and then the basketball and whatnot. And that's not the intent, and shouldn't be of this rule if we were to pass it.
Hey, Kate, this is Pam. I completely agree with Paul, and I do know that there's option A, option B. Option B is primarily for the 1A, 2A. If this is implemented, I think there also needs to be an established timeline, because schools are already preparing schedules. I think, like I said, that needs to be implemented as well. So I don't know. Kate, I would like to hear from you.
So I have some personal experience with this. Coming from New York, they do have co-ops. I lived in a small community in central New York. We co-opt wrestling and we co-op hockey. Actually, with my husband's school, that was right across one street. We both had two small schools, and we actually brought in a third school in hockey. So I've seen this work. I mean, I don't know how long it was implemented prior to me being in high school, but it's still in operation. And I definitely think it has a benefit for small communities. I agree 100% with Paul that I believe it needs to be just with uh, our small schools and public schools that, you know, you can't bring kids in. There's no lottery. I don't think it should really apply to our charters and private that have the ability to bring kids in, that have the ability to grow as schools. I think this really should be for those small rural frontier communities in our state. So I agree with that. I think as long as we have the right language and it is very specific in the way that we structure it so that it cannot be taken advantage of in those situations like Tim was talking about, I think it definitely could have a benefit to our state because we have such a wide variety of schools, school districts, and communities here. So that's my opinion on it. Others?
I agree. I think option B would be uh, where I would favor this because that specifically addresses a specific group of people in our state and schools that we could watch and monitor and look at, have a history with, know what they're doing, and the schools know each other. I think if we go beyond that and try to throw this into the non-public school realm, I think it even opens up a bigger can of worms. So I think our traditional 1A and 2A schools in the state kind of know each other. And I know being on committees with that group of people over the years, they are very, very protective of their rules and regulations in the 1 and 2A. And I would really like to get some kind of a survey or response from just those traditional 1A and 2A schools in the state, in the public school realm, and really get a view of what they think about that with regards to this and get their opinion, since it looks like we are looking at narrowing and focusing the scope of this co-op programs just into that classification. Thank you.
Kate, if I could make a statement. So being over in the East, one of the things that just looking at this and thinking through this would be the commuting of students. If you're looking at West Wendover, you're looking at, I mean, Wells is our closest one at 50 miles. Jackpot is an hour and a half away. White Pine, for instance, if that was a possibility, is again another hour and a half away. I just don't see how, I don't know if parents would be willing to do the traveling, and I don't know right now regarding budgets for travel in regards to our district anyway for Elko County. That would cause an issue with how would you bus the kids there to get them to practice, or would you do a central location? That would be my concern, especially over in the East, because we are kind of spread out with what we have.
I think that's a great point, and that is part of the conversation that needs to be had, right? Because we have to say, okay, if people are willing, that's one thing, but is it logistically possible for us to actually do this in certain communities where they would want to do it, but it's going to cause more of a hardship on everybody to even make it happen than just to not have the team. So I agree with you 100%. I mean, my opinion too on that would be the schools have to be willing and they have to have the means to actually do it, to even
Right.
do it. So offering it and saying this is a possibility for those communities that can do it, want to do it, I think is a reason we should still move forward with it. But I do agree with you, like on the side that there's going to be communities where they want to do it, but it might not be able to happen for them. And we have to kind of talk through some of those logistics.
But I think if we give them the opportunity, like this is just kind of opening it up and saying, here's your opportunity to do it. if you choose not to, you choose not to. You have all of, you know, again, all of the things that they have to look at individually. And each, I mean, we have some of our smallest communities in Nevada as some of our wealthiest. So it's all going to be different for each one. But I think as a group, we just open up the opportunity and then let them kind of figure it out. But I agree that as long as we keep it 1A, 2A public and we keep those private and charter out, I think we give them a good opportunity.
I agree.
The other
Well, I
part,
think too, the other situation would be like you going back to the, if you do have it, let's say West Wendover would like to, we had a couple kids up in Jackpot or Oahe that want to come down and play basketball or football. Well, now you take West Wendover out of the opportunity for playing in the playoffs. So that's a discussion that, you know, a school would have to have pretty solidly to decide, you know, are we willing to take the chance of, you know, we want these kids to play. I'm 100% behind that. I'm just worried that, you know, we got a couple kids that want to come down and play. Well, that kind of kicks us out of being able to be participating in playoffs, and that could kind of, you know, upset somebody.
But you don't have to accept them.
You don't have to, yes.
Exactly.
Right.
Completely optional.
Right. And I understand that. I'm just saying, you know, you're looking at across the board, and you don't want to, you want the kids to play. They may benefit your team, but then you got the other side of things going, well, sorry, you can't be in the playoffs, but you know, I understand both sides of it. It's just, that's going to be a tough situation, I think.
so my question again is a comment I made earlier about the timeline, Mr. Jackson and Kate. When would a school have to be, or schools have to notify you that they are choosing to be part of the co-op program?
Kate, if you don't mind, I'll jump in first. Thanks, Pam, for that question. I think there's a couple things at play here. One is if they're not postseason eligible, that makes a very big difference in their ability to schedule, for the fact that as the season goes on and progresses, the opportunity for open slots of games is going to be reduced as everyone gets deep into their league schedules. So that's one of the caveats there that we would have to know as soon as possible. I think this is one of those things we would have to know going into the next year. In other words, if they're going to schedule, let's just use Elko for an example. Say Elko decides they're going to co-op and they find a partner and they're going to co-op. Elko's got to know that going into the year because they're going to have their student counts and their projections for the next year. So I think that realistically, we should be looking at this and at the March board meeting, we should know who is going to be co-oping for the next year. I think that's a feasible time frame. Most schedules are not finalized or done. By regulation, we still have until the June deadline for the finalization of the board of the schedules. So that gives them a window from March to June to start building their schedules. I think that's feasible. My question would be this too. If you co-op in one sport, do you co-op is it a school co-op? In other words, all sports, or are we looking at individual sports? Because I think that would also play into the timeline as to when this would occur. Are we going to allow, and I'm just trying to throw out some things that are popping through my head right now. Are we going to allow a team that comes in August and says, holy cow, we've only got 7 kids that showed up for football and we don't have enough to play 8-man anymore? Can we go co-op so we don't have to shut it down? So I think those are things we'd have to set up a very stringent timeline. I think there's a caveat in the option B that I was just reading that it would be for a 2-year block in the realignment cycle. That's something I don't know if we can do that. In other words, what I'm saying is I don't know we can say that it's the 2 years. I think we're looking at it possibly being a 3-year commitment to it. What if you come out of it? Are we going to allow them to come out of it if they do? So I think those timelines would have to be set well in advance, like you said, Ms. Sloan, and they would have to have the caveats of answering the caveats of how long are you a co-op, the entrance and exit of being co-op, and the timeline for committing to co-oping, and is it by sport or is it by school? Because in the 1A, 2A, they align by school, they don't align by sport like they do in the 3A, 4A, 5A.
Well, I know we would request by sport just because of the nature of our bubble kids, right? Like like I was explaining earlier, we have a whole grade level that has a bunch of girls and no boys. And so I would hate to say, well, now our girls can't proceed as they normally do in NIAA because now they have to do a co-op. So I would request by sport because this is really, and also if possible, year to year. I think it would be nice to be able to come out of it, if we can. So that would be my request. And then you guys mentioned time frame, and I mean, we, without having football, which was an insane hit to Colville last year. I mean, everything took a hit. So I think it's important to give you guys a little, obviously give a little heads up, have those conversations with Tim. I mean, superintendents that are thinking about, we may not have a team, I would say would feel like the same position I felt. We had a community meeting. There's that's where you get a sense, do parents really want to drive? Do they not? And then that has to happen within the district. The district has to find the funding. That's our responsibility as each individual district to kind of figure that out. But I mean, we knew by May, because we did our whole 8th grade orientation and then asked kids to sign up, if they're interested. So I feel like June would be really, truly reasonable to say for a district to need to figure out, do we need to look at a co-op or not? If that would be something that is acceptable. I just think it's realistic for us. But.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to chime in, Heidi, to see if March, realistically, because you've gone through this, would you have known by March that you weren't going to be able to field football, or you know what I mean? So I think coming up with a timeline that's realistic for schools so that they actually are making an informed decision on whether or not they're going to be able to field a team versus just guessing would be good too.
Right, because 6 months, March was 6 months ish before the start, right? So I feel like 3 months before the start of a sport is probably the most reasonable, and especially for that summer sport. I mean, if you guys think we need to determine for each year which sport needs a co-op in advance, and I think that would be fair because we'll know our student population at that time. But I do think it needs to be June to really get a good honest gauge.
Kate and Tim, this is Pam again. That's a little difficult in that 2 month, 3 month, because I know the 1A, 2A, they probably have their schedules out for the next 2 years. Schedules are already being built, even in the 5A, 4A, 3A, 1A, 2A, April. So the sooner the better in regards to that. Tim, do you recall David and Sean's concern with this that was brought forth at the board? Because they were not in favor, correct?
Correct, they were not. Kate, do you I don't remember exactly what reasoning he gave, Pam, off the top of my head. I can't tell you it was one thing or the other. I think it was that there was the sense of losing the community. I think that was brought up. I believe that I mean, he had a great class go through right now, so they were rolling pretty high. So I mean, they had 6 pitchers, which was an amazing feat for them. They had a great baseball program this year, did a nice job for them. But I think that was some of the concern. I think the other concern was the distance between the two, which was brought up by Mr. Reamer, which I think is a great concern to be addressed and has to be fleshed out, obviously. I don't think we really went too deep into it at the meeting because it was a presentation there that I don't think we got as deep as we are now. I think we're really starting to get into it a little bit more and fleshing out what it would look like. But I can reach out to them and find out if there were some other concerns.
Yeah, I just believe that they need to be part of this conversation, because if this committee chooses to pursue this, yeah, they definitely need to be on board with this.
How do we feel about sending a survey, kind of an open-ended survey, really, where people can give their thoughts on it?
I would support that 100%. That way we get a feel for where we are. I mean, this is a great conversation, but we haven't really talked to the people that it would be impacting the most yet either. I mean,
Yeah.
we talked to a couple, but there's quite a few members in the 1A, 2A that probably need to have their voice heard.
I absolutely agree with that. And I know Rollins had made mention of that as well.
Yeah. Okay, I can start putting together something with the support of members in this committee to try to help narrow down some good questions that we can send out to see how people feel about it. I think really though, Tammy kind of hit it on the head. It's giving the opportunity. So if Smith Valley, if Lincoln County, they don't need it, they don't want it, they don't have to participate in it. So if you have two small schools that are desperate to have this happen and they don't care about the distance and they don't care about the community issues and they don't care about, the budget and they really want this for their kids like Colville, I think we should give them the opportunity to take that so that those kids don't have to sit out. So that's just kind of my last thoughts on it. Does anybody else want to provide any of their opinions on it? Doesn't sound like right now, I'll ask for a motion for what we want to do to move forward. It doesn't look like we're ready to just move forward with the language we currently have, but it does sound like we have some work to do to maybe work on this language, at least for option B. I don't think we're really in support of A, which really is more individual for individual kids. B sounds like more like what we're leaning towards. So it sounds like maybe we can work on some language, work on a survey. So just looking for a motion to see kind of how we want to move forward with this regulation at this time, if any.
Okay, I know you're looking for a motion, but if I could say one other thing about the survey, because I think that's a great idea, but if I could request that this committee ask for input from school district administration/board versus athletic directors. I mean, I know our athletic directors do a lot of amazing things, but there's a lot of tradition that is kind of held dear to some athletic directors. And if we push it to the administrative level and to the board level, then there is an obligation of the superintendents to seek input from the community and not just based on a personal bias. So I even witnessed, that's even kind of a thing here with us at Eastern Sierra. So that's where I put it up to my board to say, hey, I would like, when I even asked to go to NIAA to ask, for this possible opportunity. And I took it to my board so that I could say to my board, parents, we're here to serve kids, right? So it's not about what one person's opinion is. It's about what parents and families feel would best benefit their children. And if we ask for administration to provide that and specifically maybe a statement from the superintendent that's come from the board, then we're going to get, I believe, a more a community response versus maybe an individual opinion.
Thank you. I think that's a good point. Okay, so again, I'll just ask for a motion on anybody's thoughts on how we move forward from here with this topic.
I'd like to make the motion if there hasn't been one made.
Nope. Go ahead.
Again, I missed the last part of the conversation, so if I overstep on anyone's feet regarding some information they mentioned while I was out, I'm sorry. But I am looking to submit a co-op program option B request here for possible passage or further information that includes the survey. Would we wait till that survey comes back, or would that just be a part of the motion?
You can make a motion to do either if you want to make the motion to do the survey first, and then we can bring it back to our
Well,
next
I
meeting.
really think we need the survey information to the again, this motion then will propose that we send a survey out to class 1A and 2A schools, school administrations and district personnel, I believe, or county school district personnel, to get their feedback on this proposed issue for 1A and 2A co-op programs. Once that has been established, then I would like to bring this motion back to the board for discussion and possible action.
Okay, to the committee first?
To the committee.
Awesome. Looking for a second. So just to clarify, Rollins wants to send a survey to 1A2A school administration district personnel on this topic, and then also to bring this back to the committee once the survey has been conducted for possible action on option B. Looking for a second.
I'll second that motion. This is Pam.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that motion passes. We are going to move on to B. In your packet, this goes from pages 10 on, several pages. This
Kate,
is
can
the.
I interrupt? Kate, I'm
Yep.
sorry. Can I interrupt? Just a clarification for our own personal records. You need to mark Rollins as present on the
Yes.
attendance because he entered
I
the
got
meeting.
his entrance date or time in there.
thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Rollins, didn't want you to not get credit for being at the meeting.
He's here.
Okay,
Gotta
sorry
get
about
your
that.
attendance credits in.
No worries. Okay, looking at B,
Thanks, Jim.
this is NEC 385B.3, or sorry, 800 to 830. This is the Board of Control language. This was sent to the Board of Control, this language, back from the LCB. There was discussion at the June Board of Control meeting. These regulations all revolve around sportsmanship. So hopefully you've had a minute to kind of look through this. This has been around since, as you can see, April. So it's language that's we've been working on. I know there was some discussion at the June Board of Control meeting regarding a couple areas of this, specifically from what we could remember and what I saw in our meeting notes was the words shall and may for the principal and what they need to be doing, as well as a little bit of discussion on verbal assault and that language. So I really want to lean here on Pam, Rollins, Tim, since you guys were all at that Board of Control meeting. If there are specific things that they were really looking for us to do here, but from my recollection, that was what was talked about.
Okay, I'm going to step out. Sorry, you guys, I should have before. But I was looking for kind of a good pause. So I really appreciate you guys, hearing kind of our side of things, and just look forward to continuing to do things for kids. So I appreciate you guys, and have a good day.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. Appreciate you coming in.
All right, bye-bye.
So I think some of this language, let me find, I think page 15 here. From my recollection, again, this word here in for shall. So this is where we're talking about somebody who, and as well as verbally assaults. So verbally assaults an official, physically assaults official, the principal shall do these things. I think that was some of the hang up with the principals on the board that there are with, I think Colin brought it up, that shall should be may, if I'm, again, recollecting this all correct.
Yeah, Kate, this is Tim for the record. Yeah, it was the shall or may, because the instance I think that Colin most brought up was sometimes this is a one-off. This isn't something that it's a norm, and that they wanted to have the latitude to work with a parent if necessary or a spectator. And so that was why they wanted the word shall replaced with the word may, to give them the latitude to do what is best for their community at that time.
And I think there was one other place where that is located as well, but I think that was the main area that they talked about, as well as verbal assault with, I think the definition here, they do define it. So I don't know if there was an issue with the definition. Again, Pam, Rollins, Tim, does anybody remember the exact concern with the verbal assault part?
No.
I don't think people understood. This is Paul Anderson, the legal
Yeah.
counsel. I don't think the board understood, or I think there was confusion at least as to what an assault is.
That's what
versus,
yeah.
what a battery is. And I told Tim and I were talking this morning, and I told him, I said, assault's defined in the Nevada revised statutes, and an assault is a threat. It's not
Physical.
contact. And it can occur by action, or it can occur by words, but it's whatever places a person in apprehension of physical harm. So I think we got to eliminate verbal, because I think that's somewhat redundant and not all inclusive of what an assault is. And just say an assault. And then if you want to talk about the part up above where it says physical assault, there's no such thing as a physical assault. A physical assault would be a battery. You know, that would be where somebody actually makes contact, you know, with another person. And so, those are the things I think that ought to change with that, just to make it a little more clear.
Yeah, I remember the
I'd
same.
probably stay, discretionary, because there's also the provisions that come in under most of these sections where the principal of the school and the and or the executive director of the association end up reviewing what took place and what action was taken. And so that's kind of a backup if, you know, there's a dispute as to how a situation's handled.
So Paul, if they were to change that in section 12, subset A, then subset B would just go away as well.
Yeah, because that's just trying to define what verbal assault means, aggressive, offensive, or, and I mean, that's yeah, that's an accurate definition, but it can also, you don't need verbal in there because, whether it's words or actions that are aggressive, offensive, or profane, you know, any of those are an assault.
So do we think it needs to just read, so A should read more like active violence means an assault
Or
or
battery, or any other conduct that threatens.
do we need to keep some of the language from B and move it up A, the aggressive, offensive, profane, or do we think because it's already defined, assault is already defined elsewhere, that it's not necessary?
I mean, we could make reference actually, and the LCB loves that when you do it, to statutes or whatever that already exist. And
Yeah.
for instance, I think it's NRS 200.471 subsection 1A defines assault. And so we could just reference
Okay.
that, you know,
Okay, so it said active violence. I'm just gonna retype this just to kind of see if this makes sense to everyone. Active violence means an assault, battery, or any other conduct that threatens the safety of, and then dot, 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 the rest. And then at the end, after shoving, we would say, and just reference the NRS there. 471 subsection 1.
I'd say in A, I'd say, as using this section, quote, act of violence means an assault as defined by NRS 200.471, paren 1, then close the paren, then paren lowercase a, close paren. Because that's where it's defined in the reg, or in the statutes. And so, you know what that says, it says assault means unlawfully attempting to use physical force against another person, or intentionally placing another person in reasonable apprehension of immediate bodily harm. That's
the threat part of it.
What's that?
So that's the threat part of it, because I think what the officials really want is to make sure that the threat as well as the physical, so that kind of brings that all together.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I think if we go back, so there's areas where verbal assault.
Yeah, we're gonna have to just go back through the whole thing and.
Right, so like here in 4, on page 15, a pupil, coach, or spectator who assaults or batters instead.
Yep.
All right, let me just.
I'd say a pupil, coach, or spectator who assaults or commits a battery against a sports official or on a sports official.
Okay.
And that's where you put the may in there too as well, Kate.
Yeah.
Say that again. Oh, this is the May. Yep, that's the May. And then at the end of that sentence, thereof May. Okay, so let's just kind of, I guess for everyone's reference, just scan through this, scan through to see if there was any other language areas where the shall, the may, or verbal assault would need to be updated, and then we'll go from there. So, anything here, just if anybody sees anything.
You keep shall in 3 because those are mandates.
Yep. So I think that all looks good. That's just all of the requirements for the spectator that they're required to do. So that doesn't seem like it needs any changes. Anything else on page 13 that anybody's seeing? It looks like it. Just where we've added the word spectator in a lot of this. And I don't think anybody had any issues with any of that, right? Spectator, all this stuff was
Right.
okay.
That was the whole reason, was to add spectators into it, so we had some control over them.
Yep. So I think this page 15, this is where we have the verbal assault that we've changed. So just for everybody, we would change this to say a pupil, coach, or spectator who assaults or commits a battery on a sports official assigned to a game, contest, or meet, blah, 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 blah. Going on, the principal
May.
shall will be changed to may. So they may do these things because, like Colin was saying in the meeting, it could be one-off situations. So it should be more of on the principal and the executive director to kind of do their investigation on the situation. So that would be changed in 4.
Right.
Any questions on that there? Okay. Keep going to see if there's anything else. This is all just adding the word, small changes there.
On 16A needs to be changed to assault or battery.
Where's that?
16 on page 16, 8A.
Okay.
Oh, right above it as well. 8 also has it.
Yeah.
All right, so page 16.8, let's see. Wishes, okay, yep, so 8 just there, so we would change that to just say the severity of the assault or battery.
Yep. Yep.
And then as well, under A, assault or battery.
Yep.
Do we need to reference every time we write that word assault as defined by? Should we put that NRS next to every time we add assault versus?
No, because I think if you go, and you don't need to scroll all the way up.
If we just keep it at 4, that's the first time the word comes up.
What we might want to add into this up above at the beginning is, we have the definition of eject. So that's going to go into the definitional section of our regulations right at the beginning of the regs. It won't go into this particular reg, okay?
Right.
So maybe, maybe we just also add in there as another section that assault means the same thing as defined in, I'll have to work with you on the language of that, but it'd be basically adopting what an assault is under the statutes.
Okay, as one of our regulations definitions.
Yeah, so that every time the word assault is used, if it's
Agreed.
in definitions, then that's what it means, when as used in each regulation.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, back down to 16. So again, so this is 8. We would change this to assault and battery. 8A, assault and battery. Anything else there? Everything else to me seems good. Not seeing anything up here. So again, down here in 12, this is where we defined, which we talked about already. Page 17. So active
Oh,
violence.
so you know, what we could do there, Kate, is 12A, active
Mhm.
violence means an assault as defined, you know, in whatever the reg is. Then we could have, and I didn't look up battery, but batteries, you know, in there also, and we could reference that. And that's, like I say, the physical touching.
Yep.
Of another.
We could put that at the top as well with the NRS, like we would do for assault.
Yeah.
And we'd reference it. Okay. So we've already kind of cleaned that up. B would go away altogether then.
Yep. Think so.
Okay. Anywhere else that we're seeing any issues? It's just specifying what happens if it's the last game, second to last game. That'll look fine. I think that was it, unless anybody sees another page where we need to fix the shall or sees verbal assault. Those were the only areas that I remember seeing it. Okay. Any questions on that before we move to try to make a motion on those changes? Any other discussion about anything from the sportsmanship regulations? Any other input from anybody that was at the board meeting?
Hey, Paul, I have a question for you. Once this is approved by the committee, it's going to go forth to the Board of Control in September. At that time, we'll send it to the LCB. Do you
Right.
believe that'll have a quick turnaround?
That's a good question, because you got a legislative session that's coming up here. You know, we got a real quick turnaround on all the regs that the board did approve coming out of the June meeting. I've gotten almost all of them, all except the one-time transfer rule. They haven't quite gotten that one completely back to me. But they will be on the agenda for the September meeting. And I'm hoping, so all of those will be approved. Whether we can get something like this through that quickly, they've been really good lately. Yeah, I would think that maybe they could make these quick revisions and we could have this back by the well, because we're not going to meet till January then. But we can always have, you know, we can always have an emergency board meeting to review a reg and approve it and get it back to the LCB so we can get it ultimately finally approved. So I'm just speculating, Pam, but it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Hopefully they will.
Okay, because once it does come back and it goes in effect, I think the NIAA has to be really strategic in the rollout and the communication, and it'd be very difficult that this is approved, LCB comes back, and here we are starting playoffs. Might need to hold off until the winter season or something like that.
Yeah, well, and that would be up to us. I mean, we could wait until the January meeting, assuming they got it back to us after the September meeting with
Yeah.
language, and we could wait to present it to the board until January. We can do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, looking for a motion to move forward with changes.
This is Pam. I make a motion that we approve the changes to NAC 385B 800 through 830 regarding the sportsmanship regulation.
Looking for a second?
I will second it, Jim Pace.
Thanks, Jim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that motion passes. We will get that language written up and on the board meeting agenda. Okay, moving on to item 7C. So this regulation here, NAC 385B.708, was also sent to the Board of Control at their last June meeting from our committee with some language updates. There was discussion that was had, and it was denied and sent. It basically died at the meeting. But I brought it back to say, do we want to do anything else, change anything to re-entertain this conversation? So for background for some of our new members, essentially here what we added was a regulation to assist with some of the issues we're seeing with 8th grade students voluntarily being held back after completing all of the requirements to go on to high school and then taking some high school credit during that retained year. So for instance, if a student passes everything in 8th grade, they then go to another school, retain their 8th grade year, and are taking English 9 and Algebra 1 and Spanish 1 and biology and getting those high school credits while sitting and reclassifying themselves as 8th grade to get whatever benefit of that. So that was the language put here. I know some of the conversation of the Board of Control was regarding we don't really have the right to meddle in middle school academics and the choices of families to do those things before they enter high school, and some of the back and forth conversations they had about this. So I just really wanted to see where we want to go with this, open it up for some discussion about it, and then hopefully make a motion to either let it die and just be done with it, or make some changes to that to possibly present it back to the board. So anybody has any input on this and how they feel about this regulation and where we go next?
Hey, Kate, this is Pam. I'm looking at number 4. Pupil is retained during the middle school for the reason other than academic failure and is enrolled in a high school course during a period of time. How do you determine that the retained for another reason other than academic failure? And I understand you live this, we lived this for a very long time, and we definitely have a school in question down here that did allow kids that once they basically graduated from middle school because they did all the requirements to go on. How are we going to track that? How are other districts going to track that? And we did, I mean, if we go in that direction, and I know we've been successful with one particular school down here, how are we going to protect, or how are we going to rule? You know what I mean?
So I can tell you from experience looking at this, when I'm looking at the eligibility of a student and I see that they have repeated 8th grade because we have, their records of where they've been, or if we don't have the records of where they've been, we've asked for a middle school transcript to verify that they weren't in high school somewhere else. I'm looking at a middle school transcript and I see they have passed all of the required classes in 8th grade. And then I see the next 8th grade year and they start to take, like I said, in this, all of these high school credits. I know that they've met the requirements. I've worked with our district, and when I was in CCSD, our district's counseling office, to say, okay, taking a look at this, yeah, they have to meet these requirements and then they matriculate to high school, and that's for NDE. So I'm pretty sure that all districts know and have somebody in their district that knows what requirements students need to go from 8th to 9th grade based on the state's requirements. And if you are looking at a transcript from a middle school, from a student coming into 9th grade from their middle school years, because you've noticed that they've repeated or there's a gap in their enrollment, and you see that they have met those academic requirements, then they are being retained for reasons other than academic failure. If you see full Fs, or if you see that they haven't met those requirements, then I think it's safe to assume if they're repeating all those 8th grade courses that they're just repeating the 8th grade because of that reason. So that was kind of my thought when we were developing this, is I think we have state standards as to what they require. Now, I think that's also part of the argument for the Board of Control is we are not in the business of looking at those transcripts and determining that. So I do get that argument as well. So So I mean, my personal feeling on this is that it should be on the schools and the school districts to enroll students in the correct grade. If you have a student that is coming to your high school that has repeated 8th grade and has taken 9th grade coursework, they should be placed in 10th grade because they have begun their 9th grade classes. I do agree in some senses that it's not really our job to mandate that and to get in the weeds with regulations that revolve around that, because it is on the schools. The problem is those students are not being placed in the appropriate grades based on all of those things. And that's more of the issue, I think, than us getting involved in it. So I personally would be okay with just leaving things as they are and pushing back more on the schools to do what they need to do to place those kids appropriately. Anybody have any other thoughts? Anything else to add? What we want to do moving forward with this? Okay, if nobody else has anything to say about this, I'll look for a motion to move forward on what we do next. And if there's no motion, then we will just say that this regulation dies as is and we keep it as it originally is written. Any motion? Okay, no motion, we will move on. All
So
right,
can-
looking, yeah,
that-
go
I
ahead.
have
Are
a
you letting it
question.
die then?
Sorry,
Does this die? It doesn't go back to the board?
no, they said no to it, so there's nothing more really that we would do with this regulation. We would just let it be as is. Rollins, did you have a question though before we move on?
I had a question for Pam, because this really affected and impacted Clark County in some capacity. Are you okay with this like it is, Pam?
You know what? I really am, because I know the countless hours that Kate put into this.
Okay,
And we know that as long as I've been on this board, this has been a topic of discussion one way or another about what do we do about kids that are should be in high school, but yet the parents keep them back. They're repeating 8th grade. They don't need to take repeat 8th grade. But then again, at the same time, and I'm gonna go back to a comment that Kate said, and that comment was made at the board. Why are we in the weeds? Our regulations do not apply to middle school. And how would this apply to the NIAA? Because the regulation states that a kid's clock starts once, they enroll in high school or something like that? The regulation is
9th grade coursework, we get
Yeah.
9th grade. And
So
so we've kind of extended it to say, so, and I'll give in full transparency, I have deemed, when I was in CCSD, I have deemed students ineligible their senior year for this regulation without 4 being there. So when those students get to senior year, if they choose to appeal that, and we determine that they don't have an appeal and they want to go to a level 2 hearing, then it will be determined and there'll be a precedent set on whether or not they are considered as enrolling in 9th grade because they've begun 9th grade coursework. So I think it will kind of come out in the next couple of years if any of them decide they want to go to a level 2 hearing about their senior year eligibility. So we don't really need the language. The language was just more to assist with making those determinations to make it a little bit more clear why maybe they are being denied.
okay, perfect, good. That's what
yeah,
I
as
wanted you to
long
say.
as we have a regulation that we can hold on to, that can validate the decisions that are being made,
Okay,
that's what I want.
okay,
And I
thank
think
you.
that's what's needed.
Okay. Again, just last call, any motion or not, we can move forward to teams. Okay. So item 7D, NAC 385B.XXX. We don't have a number yet for this. This is a new regulation for teams. This was brought to the board and there was a lot of discussion about the numbers specifically associated with our individual sports and whether or not we needed to adjust those numbers. And so it was ultimately sent back to our committee to take a look at, to have some more discussion on, and then possibly make some changes to the numbers that were presented. So I don't know, again, if Pam, Tim, Paul, or Rollins being at that meeting. If you have any more input or things that you'd like to share about what was talked about at board control regarding this.
I'll chime in, Kate. I think the question comes into, for example, cross country, golf, and tennis, bowling, skiing, wrestling, and well, actually swimming, track, and field. You can be a team of one, you just can't win a team title. So we allow for an individual championship. My concern is we wanted to make sure we were having good membership as we went forward. I think that was one of the things they talked about was as new members were coming in, are we going to allow a one-person track team to count as a member in good standing as they go forward? I don't think we can put that number, looking back at that and thinking and reviewing all the information and everything else. I think for the individual sports like that, we've got to be very careful because one does constitute then that to occur. The rest of the sports, it's very simple. You can't play 11-man football without 11-man football players. So I think what I would suggest is a discussion with this group is to perhaps putting those sports together as a group of one. In other words, that one member constitutes a team. I mean, I know I'm one of those people that had an issue with it when I sat in the role that you had as well, Kate, with CCSD, that, you know, really we're allowing a school to come in with 3 athletes and counting that as meeting the requirements. I think that needs to be addressed as membership status, as opposed to they didn't field the team. We need to look at how many kids they're fielding on that and say, are you prepared to move forward? So I would be very leery of leaving the 5 for cross country, the 6 for tennis, the 4 for skiing, because actually I've learned here recently that each individual event at the skiing state championship is a state championship in and of its own. So therefore, by our own action, we have created the situation where we already said you can be the state championship giant downhill with one. So I think that the individual sports like that, we should probably look at changing that number from what we put in as the team championship. But that's just my 5 cents.
You know, this conversation started as a result of membership, about brand new schools coming to the board. Oh yeah, we're going to have A, B, C, D, all these teams. And then they end up, oh yeah, we had a boys and a girls program in the fall. We had 2 cross-country females and 1 boy. So, and then the same thing happened in the winter and in the spring. I think that's where this conversation began, because I know we believe as a board, and well, I can speak for myself, that I think as maybe this is more of a membership conversation, because we're looking for schools to come in with more participants. So, thank you.
Hey, Kate, I think we can solve this with the elimination of a word. Everybody look at the regulation. It says team means the number of pupils that participate collectively or individually. Why don't we just get rid of the word or individually?
Mm-hmm. I was thinking the same thing. I think this is what we're looking at here is the team, and what we say for our member schools, you have a team if you have this number of students. So that will relate to our membership part, right? You're not considered having a team unless you have this number. However, you can also have a team that has one individual that's not considered a team by definition for membership, say, right? Like they can still compete with one, but to be considered having a team for your membership, you have to have this number. Would that be fair? Because I think we're talking 2 different things, right? You can have a roster with 1 kid and compete. It's not, this team definition is not about if you're allowed to compete. This team definition is for membership, is what I'm getting in this conversation. And if we're talking about membership, then we should be talking about collectively. If you want to be considered having this team for your membership, you have to have this number. And then we talk about those numbers.
So Kate, what I would suggest with Tim's revision where we take out or individually at the beginning, have the quotes of team, you know, and then comma, for purposes of membership, comma, means. then you're not limiting it to, you are limiting it to membership. You're not,
Yep.
but you're not affecting competition.
I agree with that completely. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I have some clarification. So we're not having football this year. Our cross country boys 2 years ago had one runner. Last year we had three. This year I'm trying to get at least five because that's our only boys sport this fall. So for us to be a member, we have to have a boys cross country team in the fall. No other fall sports. That's correct. That's accurate.
By,
Okay.
yeah, by
So
regulation.
I got to
yeah.
get five guys.
Tim, would that be?
I'm sitting here looking at this, and what I'm worried about is that just that very definite, that
Yeah.
very situation, that if we put in the word for membership, that it wouldn't be the same in both places, because if they're on independent status, or
Right.
what I'm concerned here is the genesis of this was, like Pam said, was to help us with the membership issue.
Thank-
And I'm wondering now if perhaps putting this here in defining team this way, we're creating two separate classifications of team, and we're going to have some clarification issues, because like Jim just brought up, this year they only have 3 kids on the cross country team, and they don't meet the standard that we just set, but that doesn't mean they're not good members in good standing, because they did fulfill the requirement of having somebody in that role. To me, I feel like we're creating a circular argument that we're just going to keep going round and round and round about.
So,
Go ahead,
yeah, I agree with that. And don't we define, I mean, either expressly or by implication, what a team is in our packets for regional and state championships? I mean, don't we? And maybe I'm wrong on that. I was just, but for instance, if for a team to go to state and win a state championship in cross country, you would have to have how many score? 5 or 4? I'm not sure what it is. Okay, so and that my thought in putting, for membership purposes, was not to affect long-standing members like Wattel, but brand new schools that are coming in and making applications and saying, well, we got, we can throw one boy and one girl into cross country, and we'll have one wrestler in boys and girls, and you can in essence join the NIAA with 1 or 2 athletes, by doing something like that. And that's what I think the concern of the association is in terms of membership, more than schools that are experiencing a decline in enrollment and that sort of thing, like maybe happening up in Wattel. But I don't know how you clarify that. Maybe take the language I proposed.
Yeah, I feel like we're talking about new membership and maybe looking at our regulations that have to do with how you become a member and adjusting specifics there about this. I don't know, because I agree with Tim that I do feel like we're now classifying 2 different teams essentially there, because we do have a team, but it doesn't by definition fit that. Like, I don't know. I could see some confusion here between new members, existing members, what actually is a team, and what can compete as a team, and what can win a championship as a team. They're all different things.
Well,
just
you
by
never
this
know.
definition, just by this definition, you technically, that's where I'm at with this right now, is you technically couldn't win a state title in wrestling if you didn't have a full team at state wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need a full team to win the state title. I'm of the volition now that I think this should be moved to the new membership committee to be brought back to this body once they can flesh this out a little.
I agree 100%. And like I made the comment earlier, this whole conversation began because of membership.
This is a membership issue only.
Right.
I really think so. I mean, we have traditional schools in this state that would not meet the team definition based on this NAC. Some of our schools that have we have schools in Washoe County that have 3,000 kids, and they don't meet the team definition on 7 of these based on this NAC. But they're active members. There needs to be somehow in our regulations, bylaws, or something that separate the difference between what a team definition is for their application to enter our association and then this. So we need to have those two are completely two separate entities, and we need to find out how we can separate those two so that a group that comes in who's starting a new school in Washoe County can't come in and say, hey, this NAC says I only need one cross-country runner to have a team. So I don't know how we write that, Paul, or Tim, or how that's defined, or maybe it's defined in the definition here that states that these numbers and regulations apply to those schools that have already or are active members of the NIAA or whatever, something along those lines. Because
Well,
technically, I can come into this league as a new member with 3 girls teams and 3 boy teams, 2 in each season, with a certain number. And once I meet that threshold for an X amount of years, I am a full-fledged member. After I'm a full-fledged member, I might have one cross-country runner in 4 years. That happens.
I think the best proposal was to, since this is a membership thing or issue, is to send it back
Agree.
to committee, membership people that are looking at those regulations to deal with it there, if it can be. We may not be able to. But we do need something because, we always raise the issue of you got to have a boys and a girls team in each season of, in one sport for each season. And we got to be able to figure out what that means for new members.
Do we need a definition for team for the competition side and or the winning of championship side, like team championship side? I mean, do we need to hash this out in separate ways? Is that not necessary because we already kind of understand that you can have one individual? I guess really is the question.
I mean, if if you're not requiring a certain number, for instance, like Tim raised, and you're not requiring 7 pupils to qualify for state in wrestling to win a wrestling title, then why would we define it as a team being 7 pupils for wrestling, right? I mean, that's the problem, I think. Unless you could break it down by, there are, as we've discussed before with the co-ops, there's a certain number of pupils you need to play 8-man football, to play 11-man football, to play basketball, to play soccer. There's that's just required by rule, right?
Right.
So.
But like, are those numbers already kind of known because they're NFHS rules? You know what I mean? Like, do we need to have?
Those are already in the rules in general. So why do we need to define it?
Right. That's what I mean. I don't know that we necessarily even need that to be a part of our regulations. I think we should just focus and have the new membership committee focus on what we want to say about new membership regarding the number.
Right.
And just leave out like a general just team definition, because I don't think we need that because we have other NFHS rules that cover that.
I agree with that.
Okay. So any other discussion about this? If not, looking for a motion to move forward with where we would like to go.
I'll make the motion, but I had to pull away because I just got a phone call. What was the last part of that conversation? Can somebody just recap really quick?
What Paul and I were just talking about?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
we were just, no, you're good. We were just basically saying, is it even necessary to specify how many people you need on a team to compete and win a championship, because it's already like innate in NFHS rules and things like that. Do we need to really define that? Or can we just focus solely on talking about teams for membership? And Paul and I basically kind of just said, we both agree that it's not necessary for just the competing side of things to have a regulation.
So this is more so like we've said, membership, for
Yep.
the purposes of membership. Are we looking that maybe this should go to the membership committee?
Yeah, that was part of the end of that conversation. Yes, that we should basically have them take a look at it for the membership side and make it about that.
By curiosity, when is the membership committee going to reconvene?
We are working on that right now, Miss Sloan.
Okay.
We are getting up to speed for everything, but we are trying to have at least all of our committees have a meeting prior to the end of this year so that we can actually have some reporting back at the June board meeting. Not June board, I'm sorry, January board meeting, but that committee will be getting back together shortly.
Okay, because that's important, because every year we end up having so many brand new schools come forth to the board, and this
And
information.
the last time that committee met, you can attest to this, most of the people are either gone or moved on to different positions and different roles. It's been quite a while since that committee has been together as a sitting body.
No,
So
you're
we're-
absolutely correct, but I think this one is vital, this membership committee. Okay. So you're looking for a motion, I'll make the motion that we need to just table this at this time and take it to the membership committee that will eventually reconvene, at which time it'll come back to this committee, or does it go to the board? I'm sorry, that's really not a motion.
I don't know that it necessarily needs to come back to our committee if we think it's ready to go to the board, but if we want, that committee wants this committee to basically look at it because it's a rule regulation policy to make sure wording looks good before it goes to board of control. I don't know, Tim, Paul, do you have a thought on whether or not it needs to come back to this committee or can go straight to the board?
Yeah, I think you go straight to the board and then, I mean, if just leave it to the discretion of the membership committee as to how they want to handle it.
I'll
Okay.
second.
Here, let me clean up my motion. I'll make the motion that we take NAC 385B point XXX, the definition of teams, that we take it and give it to the membership committee for review and determination.
Looking for a second?
Second.
Thank you, Rollins. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, that passes. Okay, moving on to 7E. NAC 385B.714. This regulation, when we met in the middle of May, our last meeting before the Board of Control meeting, we did not take action on. We were just revising and talking about it and adding some language. So what you will see between pages 26 and 27 are the revised parts of this regulation that we talked about. And so I would like us to take a look at that and make a motion on whether or not we would like to send this to the board. If we agree that we do like everything and want to send it to the board, it will go to workshop immediately. Tomorrow will be posted if we do decide that, and go to the board for the September meeting for them to make a determination on. So essentially, just to give some background, 714 is one of our residency regulations that talks about what the burden of proof is for the parents to provide to the school district or the executive director regarding new residents. So anytime a physical move from address to address happens, and specifies a little bit about if they go back to a former residence, and that's kind of listed there. So take a look at it if you haven't already. There's a couple things that we may want to discuss with this that have come up actually in level 2 meetings with Paul and I that I do want to just touch on as we're looking through this. But open up for discussion for anybody that wants to talk about any of the changes that we made here. Okay, there's a couple things I want to just bring up. When we were looking, so some of the things that we did here, we're trying to clean up the language because parents have had issues if we referenced this regulation with understanding what's needed for the proof of address versus the abandonment piece. So we kind of separated that to say here, because up here at 3, it talks about what you need to get a new residence. So A and B are really talking about the new residence. And so 5, we referenced the evidence required to prove A and B, which is about your new house, is, I'm sorry, that's backwards. A and B is about your former house. So the 2 things that you would need for your former house in 5 would be the sale and that your entire residence has been vacated. And then I'm mixing this up, right? Yeah, sorry. A and B are the current. So I think that was why I had an issue with 5. So A and B are about your new residence. 5 is referencing this is required for your new residence. So I do think the only thing we didn't really consider here is why we need a document indicating the sale of a former residence when we're just talking about the proof of address here. So that part, as you can see, I just got confused. I don't know why we have that language there. The sale of the former residence shouldn't have anything to do with their current, because they might not have sold their previous. So 5 should really, in my opinion, say you have a deed for a new residence, you're leasing an entire residence, which is B, or C, you have a bill for those utilities. That will prove A and B from 3, which state that you are, you have a new residence and it's located within the zone of that school. So that was just something I thought about when I was rereading through this. I don't know that we need to include that language there because it also is in number 4 talking about a former residence has been sold. So that's the abandonment part is 4, if that makes sense. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on that, where my mind was going with that, but it didn't really make sense to talk about the former residence when we're talking about proof of address here.
Well, I would actually, Kate, want to go back to 4. The evidence submitted must include, without limitation, information and documentation establishing that the former residence has been sold or transferred from legal ownership or possession of the parent and legal guardian. I also think it should include family members or relatives, because I remember a lot of times in our case, we have parents turning over the ownership just to their oldest son who stays there.
So 3, if you read it, 3, like the second line does say that you have the former residence is not currently being used by the parent or legal guardian or by any other relative of the family people. So it is in there.
Okay, good. I just know that sometimes parents see 1, and once they see 1, they skip straight to 5. They don't even read 2 or 3. And so anyway, that's good as long as it's in there, because that's one of the biggest issues that we have is they're not reading 3.
No, yeah.
So anyway, that's good. As long as it's still in there, we're good to go.
Yep. Any other thoughts on any of that? So again, 4 is all about the former address. 5 is all about the current address and what they need to prove. We wanted to keep a lot of this language so it was very specific as to what we typically take. And if you look down at F, it also says any other evidence indicating the pupil resides at the new address. So to me, if I'm a parent reading this and I send in my bank statement and I say, well, it says right here, I can provide any other evidence. Why aren't you taking this? So the other thing I was thinking about with this specific section here is maybe adding something at the end that says at the new address as requested by the school district or executive director. So it puts the power back to us who are making those determinations to say, I may ask for other documentation to prove your residence versus allowing the parents to say, well, this regulation says I can provide you anything that shows and you should be accepting it. I don't know if there's thoughts on that, but that was just another small change that I thought might help clarify some of the issues we had with the proof of address stuff. Any thoughts on that? No. And then I just want to touch on 6 really quick. Paul and I were in a level 2 and this actually came up. This 6 is very similar to what we'll see in 718 when we go down and read that, where it basically states that if a pupil establishes eligibility at one address in one school and then they transfer and then come back, they go to a different school, get eligibility at that school as well, and then they come back to that former school district in that zone with that house, that same residence, that they're ineligible for 180 school days. And this actually did, like I said, came up, and there was some issues with language regarding a sanctioned sport and not all the sport. So for instance, I'll give you the example. The student got transferred to another school, got eligibility, but had only signed up for a single spring sport because they transferred in the spring. They didn't have any other sports on their registration. And so it was argued that they're only ineligible in the sport they got eligible in at the new school when they transferred back to their old address. And so it may be beneficial for us to clean up the language a bit here so that it's very clear that we're saying when you establish your eligibility, you're establishing your eligibility in sanctioned sport, in whatever those sports are when you move into a residential zone for that school. It's not just the one you registered for in that particular transfer. So my thought on this would be to say, like, if a pupil establishes eligibility to participate in sanctioned sports pursuant to the section, and then later on it says is ineligible to participate in interscholastic activities, I think that's fine because it's plural there and it says the activities at that school. So that was another kind of area that I thought might need a little bit more cleaning up.
Kate, I too sat in that level 2 hearing and I agree with you 100% because on the other side of the table, it was just semantics that they were arguing. So yeah, definitely.
Well, and I think it needs to be consistent with 718 that discusses all sports. So that.
Yeah, and that was my other question, Paul. If we want it, I don't know if it, when you're looking at these regulations, is it necessary to be in both places? 1, and 2, should it be the exact same language in both because it is saying the exact same thing?
I think it needs to be consistent. So
Yeah.
say the same thing.
Because if and we'll go to 18, but when we go to 18, you'll see at 8 and 18, it's very similar language, just some small changes, like it says the sanctioned sport instead of in interscholastic activities at the last sentence there. So I think whatever we decide for language for 6 needs to be what 8 also says, if we're going to keep it in both places.
Okay, John Grandy, I'm just going to agree with you there. It needs to be consistent because it does say a sanctioned sport, any activity in 6 there. And then when you go down to 118, it says a sport, the sport.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
So
that was really
and I think in this one, like a sanctioned sport, because it goes with activities, to me, that's neither here nor there. You can leave it a, you can change it to any, it doesn't matter. If you're cleared for bowling and then you transfer back, you're ineligible for all activities. It's the next regulation that needs to be cleaned up. That one's messy.
Yeah. So we could maybe keep this as is with A there, Paul, right? So if a pupil establishes eligibility to participate in a sanctioned sport, is that clear enough? Or do we say in sanctioned sport and then leave the interscholastic activities and then we add on 18 interscholastic activities? Or do you think we need to also like make that plural or just keep it as a sanctioned sport? Or any sanctioned sport? It's all semantics, but I don't know. I just want to make sure it's clear if we change it.
Are you talking about subsection 6?
Yeah. Yeah, and 6 for 714. So when you look at 718, 8, there's definitely some issues there because it's all singular. Here, because it does say if you transfer your ineligible to participate in interscholastic activities, that's plural. So that to me is like you can get eligible in a sport, doesn't matter the sport, but when you transfer, you're ineligible in all the activities. Or do we change it to in all sanctioned sports? Or you know what I mean? I just want to make sure whatever language we decide between the two makes sense and is what we're trying to say.
Hang on one sec. So 6 is written as it implies all sports, right? Is that what we're saying already? The way it's
Yeah,
written?
I mean, I would say the only
So
thing
I
that
think, yeah, the clarification needs to be in number 8 on, or in subsection 8 on 718, that it applies the same to all sports, just like 714 says.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we have it. I feel like it should be probably the exact same language
Yeah,
because it's saying
Yeah,
the same thing. It's just related to different areas.
that's what I said earlier. I think if we can be consistent, then we don't get, lawyers pointing back and forth to different regs saying
Definitely.
because you have different language, you have different meanings. And so if we're consistent, then that argument can't be made.
So do we think 6 is good as is with the edits to be able to be moved to be the same language for 8 then?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So the plural, the singular part of the first sentence is okay. Doesn't matter, just in a sport.
Um, if you go down about 3 or 4 lines, I would say the pupil is ineligible to participate in all interscholastic activities at the former school for 180 days. That would clear it up, wouldn't it? Or would it?
Yeah.
Or does that further confuse it?
Do we need to say sanctioned sports? Because that's really these
Well,
interscholastic
yeah,
activities.
instead of
Anonymous,
interscholastic
is that okay?
activities, yeah, say sanctioned sport in all sanctioned sports.
Yeah. In all sanctioned sports. I think that would clear it up.
Yeah,
And then we would basically just copy that same exact language and put that in 718 when we get there.
correct.
Any other discussion on any piece of this or?
When you say all sanctioned sports, is that at all levels? Or just,
Yeah.
just all levels? Okay.
Yeah. Doesn't specify, most of our regulations don't specify,
Right.
if you're ineligible, whether it's full eligibility, some eligibility, or whether if you played in varsity or you played JV or you played B, if that affects, it's pretty much all or nothing in all of our regulations for the most part, minus our one sub varsity eligibility regulation. Anything else on this? Okay, looking for a motion to make any changes. I gave a few options of things that possibly we want to look at. I also don't mind making the motion if need be for the things that I edited if somebody doesn't want to make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the suggested edits as presented to NAC 385B.714.
Okay, and just to be clear, so I can kind of go over those ones, that would be in 5A, removing indicating the sale of former residence, and it would just be saying a document. I'm sorry, indicating would say a document indicating the issuance of a deed. So we would remove the sale of the former residence and out of there, since that's relating to the previous address and not needed in this section. The other addition would be on F. Any other evidence indicating that the people and the parent or legal guardian reside at the new address as requested by the school district or executive director. Clarify that we can reach out for more. And additionally, changing in 6, the word down here to in all sanctioned sports instead of interscholastic activities. Those would be the 3 changes. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Rollins. Okay. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay, that motion passes. All right, moving on to 7F, which is 718. Again, this regulation was brought to, we talked about it in our committee. We did not bring it to the board yet. We changed some of the language, so that's what we're looking at here that we made, so that it fits better with some of our new regulations, like the one-time transfer, which is referenced there in 1. And our job here is to basically see, are we okay with the changes made, and are we ready to move it forward to the Board of Control for their review? This regulation is similar in some ways to 714. We are talking about when students transfer, their period of ineligibility, and what they basically have to prove when they do move. Some other ways they have to prove based on guardianship and legal guardianship, and if the parents are together or not. So that was kind of most of this language we didn't touch because it's pretty explicit as to what we need and what's required. So it was good. There were small changes like adding at the top here a reference to the one-time transfer. Basically saying that you can use the one-time transfer in those certain circumstances. However, outside of the one-time transfer, this regulation applies for those physical moves. And I think the reason we really put that in there is just to protect all of our other regulations that have to do with moving and residency. So it wasn't like the one-time transfer could just supersede everything that we already have. So I think that was part of the reason we put this in here, is just to reference that, to say this still applies there. And then the only other change really here, we just had a legal, we don't look at legal custody when we're eligibility determinations, we look at physical custody. So that language was just a bit outdated there for that piece. And then the only other change we had was to remove 9 and 10, because those are already addressed in other regulations. So it was just repetitive there. So based on our previous conversation for 714, I think 8 is really where we need to make any additional changes before we decide what we want to do here. Because this is, like I said, very similar to 714 in the sense that it's talking about going back to a former residence. So if you're comparing the two language and kind of just look at them, they're very, very similar. So my suggestion to here would be just to copy what we have adjusted in 6 to be exactly that same language in 8, unless anyone sees any reason for it to be different. So opened up for discussion with any of the changes we previously made, and possible changes to 8.
I think it could be the same.
Yeah, I think it reads pretty much exactly the same. There's just small changes in language out of preference. I think we could copy that over. Any other discussion about the 2 other small changes that we made up here, or the removal of 9 and 10?
I just want to be sure that on 8, if that student who was eligible to participate in a sanctioned sport for that 1 year, and let's say he did transfer, he was able to participate, but he did not participate in a single sport for 180 days. His name did not appear on a roster or anything, and transfers back, would he be or she be eligible at their school they're returning back to?
I think that's a very, very good question. And that was actually part of the argument that came up in this level 2 where we talked about this regulation, because though he asked for eligibility, he was approved for eligibility, he was rostered, he was like, well, I didn't participate in any track meets. So I think that does need a little bit of clarifying, if depending on what we think here. So Paul, what do you think about this regulation? Is a student becoming eligible by attending that school, or are they becoming eligible because they're actually applying for eligibility? Would
So-
we say that? Yeah.
If you go back to the hearing we had last week on this, the distinguishing fact there was that the student did apply for eligibility at the school they transferred to. You did grant that to them. And then he said, well, because of timing, I didn't participate in track, and therefore that's the only sport you can render me ineligible in. Yeah, I think if the student takes active steps to become eligible athletically and is approved, then I think this applies. If the student's just bouncing around from school to school but not competing in athletics, and then finally decides he or she wants to, I don't think that student should be punished. I don't think the rule should apply in that case.
Wow, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with a kid going out for a team and not making that team according to this rule.
Well, no, that's different, Rollins, because now
Okay.
you're saying because the kid's trying out and that they are participating. I'm talking about a kid who does nothing athletically.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I'm talking about this same kid gets eligibility at a school and can go out for a sport, goes out for basketball, gets cut, doesn't play, not on the roster, but he went out, and then he stays there for the remainder of the year, then transfers back to his other school. I'm thinking that I think that kid should gain eligibility. His name never appeared on a roster. Yeah, he went out for basketball and got cut. Now, if he would have went out for football and you don't cut in football, you stay on the team, you don't play, or whatever the case may be, I see that kid losing eligibility when he goes back to his own school. But a kid that went out for a cut sport and got cut never officially made a roster.
But Rollins, if we define participate in our definitions, it's NAC 385B036, and it's defined. Participate means to engage in a sanctioned sport as a pupil beginning on the first day of practice for the sanctioned sport set forth in the schedule of activities. So that's the first day of tryouts.
Wow.
So participate that would be participation. That would mean, yeah, you've engaged, and so now, yeah, the rule applies if you transfer back.
Wow, that's a tough one there. Okay. I mean, they could always appeal. I mean, they won't win, but they could appeal that, because I tell you what, I have a problem with that aspect here of trying out, according to the NIAA, trying out for a cut sport and not making the team basically subjects you to full athletic eligibility with that team, whether you played or not. Wow, that is tough.
Well, they would probably, if things are all going as they should, if they're already making it to tryouts, they've already completed their activate, or at least in the process of transfer pending, they
Yeah,
might not have gotten full eligibility depending on if it hasn't been processed yet at the time of tryout, but they're still at least applying for their eligibility at that school. So I think that's
yes.
part of it, because it says who is eligible to participate. Now, there could be an argument, right? I didn't fully get approved. I was trying out and then I got cut. That could be their argument for an appeal.
Well, I'd like to participate in that if that's the case. Not that that happens. My guess is that in a district that is as big as Clark County, and even in Washoe County, we have I mean, I'm dealing with hundreds of kids right now that have been cut off of volleyball teams this year. I mean, I could imagine how many girls were cut off of volleyball teams in Clark County with 40 schools there. I know we have hundreds of kids in our district that have been cut off of volleyball teams. So they're not participating, but yet the NIAA sees them as full participants on a volleyball team right now. And I don't necessarily think that's fair. But anyway, I mean, that's how the rule reads.
Yeah.
That's how I will interpret it and tell the parents as we move forward.
Well, and
And
I
I
think
can tell you, oh, go ahead. Amy.
I would say, I think it also, I mean, and maybe you guys don't have the same issue up here, but I think it stops the original, probably the reason they did the rule was to stop the school shopping. Jumping like, oh, I'm not good enough to make this team, so I'm going to go to this school to make this team. And, unfortunately, sometimes when we make rules, it does hurt others in the process.
Sure.
But if I had to venture a guess, I'd say that's why it was started.
Okay.
And I can give you some numbers, Rollins. I mean, in the last 2 years when I was at Clark County and doing transfers, this particular piece of this regulation, I probably only used 2 or 3 times total, and think of all the moves that are going on in a very large district. So I
Yes.
think it's very specific to a very small amount of situations where
Right.
a student is at a certain house, they either own houses in different zones, and they are a lot of times using it in their benefit to go to this house, then to this house. So a lot of times they're going to get eligible for the transfer. It's the transfer back. So it's like you might
Yeah.
own 2 houses, you might pull all these different stunts to try to get here and there. And you're going here, you get eligible here, you go here, you're eligible here. It's the coming back to that same address. And that doesn't happen that often. And so I think that the semantics on if you're eligible or not are very small in those circumstances where it does happen. So I don't think a lot
Yeah.
of kids actually fall into this.
And you're right. I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit here because I really don't see that much here. I do see a kid transferring to another school, not playing a sport, transfers back to their school, and then they're eligible to play based on the fact that they did not. I see that more than a kid that does this. But I just thought that was kind of unique that, yeah. In most cases, I think we've had, in my 9 years now, we've had one kid that did that.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I think our other regulations, they specify like on a roster for that reason, because that's really what matters. So I agree there. Any other discussion on anything here? All right, looking for a motion to move forward with 718.
I'll make the motion to go ahead and make these minor changes in NAC 385B.1718.
Okay,
I'll
in
I'll
addition,
second that.
thanks, Pam. I just want to make sure that you're including in that updating 8 to read the same as 6 from
I
7.
am updating 8 as well. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'll second again.
Thanks, Pam. Okay, all in favor?
I
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, moving on to item 8, which is NAC 385B.710. I just put together some numbers here. This is data from Activate put together, and I'm going to talk really briefly about this because this data looks a certain way, and I just want to clarify what you're looking at. Essentially, what was asked of at our last meeting when we were looking at regulation 710, and I didn't include 710, but this is our regulation that talks about age. And so we wanted some data on whether or not we had a lot of kids that would have participated or did participate in sports that would have been affected if we changed the date from 20 to 19 and we changed to like a summer cutoff date. We had a lot of discussion about different ways we could adjust 710 possibly, but we wanted some data to talk about what effect that would have on our students. And so what you'll see here is raw data pulled for each school year with the number of actual rostered athletes that were 20 years old. And as you know, our current regulation says you cannot be rostered in the season or any future season if you are age 20. So these numbers were astonishing to me because it appeared to me at first that we had 93 students. And again, it's not disaggregated to be you were 20 during a season. It was just you were 20 during that school year. So they may have participated in a fall season and then turned 20 in spring. So it's not super in depth with the numbers. But what I'm going to tell you right now is these were the number of students rostered total on the right. On the left was the number of students that were 20 that turned 20 by May at any point during that school year. And so basically, if we change the regulation to say you can't turn, 19 after this cutoff date, all of these students would be ineligible for the whole year versus just when they turned 20. What I'm going to tell you about these numbers are, though, they're very, very wrong. Okay. And the reason they're wrong is parents do not put their date of birth in accurate for their children. And the schools are not verifying that and adjusting those birth dates. And I know this coming, Christy Weller in the Clark County School District office is fantastic at checking birth dates and sending it back to Clark County schools to update them so that they're accurate. But if I asked her the number that she has to send back, it's probably a very, very, very high number. So that being said, I spot checked some of these, and every single one I spot checked, their date of birth was wrong based on their school records. So this data to me means nothing. I'm not sure we really can get accurate data because of that issue. And that's all we're pulling from is Activate. So unless each individual school was given their athletes to go back and look at from, the ones that we have that are marked as 20 and do the verification, I don't know that we would have accurate numbers to know how many students really were 20 during their senior year, because I know that these numbers are not accurate. So the consideration here would be, obviously, if we do change our regulation to include some like cutoff date in the summer for students turning 19, these students, or any students, not necessarily these particular numbers, would be deemed ineligible the entire school year rather than just in the season and future seasons when their birthday occurred to turn 20. I put some notes in there about just the numbers being the COVID year, maybe some reclassification happening the year after COVID. And then obviously I wrote there many birth dates were entered incorrectly. So this also only includes rostered athletes. So we obviously are going to have a bunch of 20-year-olds that were told, hey, you cannot roster because you are 20. That wouldn't be included in this data if it were accurate. But that being said, this data really is skewed. It doesn't really mean anything. I have no idea how many students we really have that would have been affected. So unfortunately, we did try to get that information, but I don't know that it exists with the inaccuracies that we see in Activate. So this is really just for discussion. Wanted to touch base on what we see here, and if there's any desire to revisit 710 at a future meeting to talk more about the age requirements, and if we want to make any changes. Keep in mind that if we're not changing anything with our regulation 708, that has to do with, who's considered a ninth grader, because that was kind of our other way to battle some of the issues with people repeating and being held back voluntarily. The other battle was with the age. So if we don't change anything with 708, do we want to revisit 710? If not, we let it die and we don't need to bring it up again unless it comes up in the future. So open for discussion. Any thoughts on any of this information and skewed data that we have?
Well, first of all, just looking at this data, it would be extremely alarming if these numbers were correct, and we had actually had these kind of numbers. And even though from a percentage standpoint, it's not, it's not that bad, but just looking at the raw numbers on that left side, to me, could be staggering depending on who these are. But it just takes one 20-year-old LeBron James to change the whole ruling and viewpoint of the state if that were to happen. So the rule currently states that a kid can play high school sports up to their 20th birthday.
Yes, in a sense, they can't turn 20 in that season. So like if their birthday falls anytime in that season, they can't start. So it's not up to their birthday. It's just, yeah.
So they can't play. If my birthday is January 1st, I can't play varsity basketball as a ninth grader I mean, as a 12th grader, and I'm gonna turn 20 on January 1st of my senior year, I can't go out for the basketball team?
Correct.
I, I mean, I think that rule is fine. But I tell you what, in looking at this, boy, that's scary.
But I wouldn't even really look at it all that hard. I
Okay.
just wanted to present it because I spot every single one I spot checked was wrong. Every single one. So the number might be two. You know what I mean?
Well, I hope
might,
that number's two. I mean, that's what our hope is that we're not playing
I really would hope.
the two kids that are playing
Yeah.
it.
And the issue with this too, we could have students that are out there playing ineligibly as 20-year-olds, because a lot of times what's going to happen is, you check that student, their incoming year at your school, and they're in ninth grade, and you're not really paying attention to their grade at that point. And you're like, oh yeah, they're good to be at my school. And then they just continue at your school for 4 years. And their senior year, you're not looking at their date of birth. You're just like, yep, they returned, they're good. I'm approving all their stuff,
Oh,
and not
sure.
realizing. So there could be rostered athletes that did participate at 20. I don't know, because that data is so wrong.
Well, I don't think there was a big upcry or upkeep or revolt about changing this at our meeting. You remember that, Paul? Or Pam? I don't really, Tammy, I don't remember hearing that much about this in terms of people were wanting to change it or do anything else.
It wasn't brought up at the Board of Control.
Yeah, it was proposed and
was.
discussed and didn't go real far. And I think there were concerns in changing it. So.
But here, right? I don't think did it get brought to the Board of Control?
Yeah,
We
it
didn't.
did.
Yeah.
Just a discussion.
It was a
Okay.
discussion, yeah.
Just a
And
discussion.
I think we asked for more data, is I think what it was, because it wasn't a long discussion, I remember that. But I do remember that it was brought. And that I think people needed more, like, how many people did this really affect? I think is
Yeah.
what people were asking.
Yeah, I don't know that we'll be able to find that out.
I wouldn't show them this data.
No.
Shoot. Woo, we'll have 17-year age limit quick.
We would honestly, what we would have to do is send out the raw data to the entire membership and say, look at the students at your school for these school years, and look in your student information system, your Infinite Campus, whatever it may be, and tell us if they're, and fix the date of birth to what it should be, and then recalculate all of that data. So that would be the only way I think we could actually get real data. But then the other thing, as I mentioned, is it's not going to include your 20-year-olds that were told, well, you can't roster because you're 20. So we don't know who would have possibly gone out that would be affected if we change it. I think they would always have been affected regardless of if the change of the rule. But I guess if we just want to look at who is a new student that would be affected, that got to participate before they turned 20, but then was just out in the other sports, we could probably get that data, but it would take a lot of work and cooperation from everyone in the membership.
And a lot of time. I
Lot of
presume it would take a whole school year to
Yeah.
gather that data. Was
And I
there,
don't feel like there was an appetite for it either. I don't feel like it was, personally, from what I heard, I don't feel like there was enough people that wanted this to happen, that it would be worth all of that.
that? Yeah, I don't, yeah. In fact, Paul, if I remember correctly, I don't think there was any particular board member that was fighting for this. And I don't think there was even any public comment that said, hey, look, my kid should have played. He was 20 and they wouldn't let him play. All that. I don't think any of that came up. So
I think it was brought up for the opposite reason.
Yes.
I think it was brought up because there were some major concerns, with parents specifically holding their kids back for sports for a year, 2 years, and that there were people that brought up, I remember football was the biggest one we talked about. You have these kids that are turning 20 that are playing with these kids that are 14, that are like basically men. I remember that's why it was brought up. It wasn't the other way around, right, Kate?
Yeah, it was kind of in
Yeah.
conjunction with with the rule that we talked about earlier, 708 or whatever, with the ninth grade people holding their kids back before putting them into high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd really be up to this committee if we want to move forward with trying to draft some language, because we did talk about how we could do that, looking at CIF, what they do. If we wanted to draft something, if there's an appetite in the committee to move for basically moving it so that if you're 20 at any time during your school year, essentially, you are not eligible to participate in any sport. So if you could turn 20 May 1st in the school year, but you're not eligible the entire year, would be essentially what would happen if we changed it to like a 19-year cutoff date. So it was the opposite that we were talking about here because of the issues that we're seeing, like Tammy brought up. So I think it would just be if we have an appetite here to push forward with possibly changing it to affect more students than we currently have. And if not, then we let it die. If we want to move forward, then we talk about possibly bringing 710 back, talk about language.
Hey, Kate, what's your stance on this? Because I know this was topic of discussion when you worked in this office.
So my thought on this is if we change this regulation, 20-year-old students in high school is essentially saying you were held back at 2 years in a lot of ways. Because most of our students, depending on birthday cutoffs, are 17, 18 in their senior year. So I think if we change this regulation to have a 19-year-old cutoff in the summer, that means students still get an additional year to be held back at any point prior to high school, because you can be held back in our state anytime, before that, and still be eligible your entire senior year, for most kids in most circumstances. I think changing this then just says, if you're going 19, 20 in your senior year, you have been held back twice at some point in your life, and you are now, still eligible currently to participate in football, for instance, if your birthday is later in the school year. I don't think our current regulation is fair across the board for all sports because
of where they fall.
And a lot of birthdays are going to be later because of birthday cutoffs for grit. So I think it does make sense to relook at our regulation and possibly change when we do cutoffs and dates. Cutting off in the summer means you still can be held back at some point in your whole schooling career and have your whole senior year if you're turning 18, 19 during that school year. So my personal thoughts on it are, I think it's still worth a conversation for fairness across all the different sports. And because it still allows for that holdback year at some point, and you're still eligible. But yeah, 14 and 20-year-olds, I don't think should be on the same playing field.
I kind of agree with Kate too, because
I do too.
because like we said, it does depend on 100% where the sport falls. Because, and I mean, I remember when we talked about this, like I used my own son as an example, is even with keeping him, he's a late September birthday, and I didn't even start him till later. And even if he would have been held back a year, he would still be fine. So it's not, because I know some, and I don't remember who, but I remember some people were saying, we're taking parents' choices of, I remember that specific thing was brought up, like we're taking parents' choices away from them if we do this, but we're really not, because it's really giving a 2-year leeway almost. And I agree, it shouldn't matter where the sport falls. Like you shouldn't be able to play football, but then not get to play, wrestling, not get to wrestle.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'll say I always thought that part of the rule was kind of funny that we're saying a kid is not safe to wrestle if they have a January birthday, but they're good enough to play that's safe enough to play football
Yeah.
with our
yeah,
students.
it just doesn't make sense.
Because you're looking at that imbalance of competition is kind of where that's coming in, and that's a funny kind of cutoff. And I think doing a summer cutoff makes it a little bit cleaner.
Really growing a lot in that 1 month, can't wrestle.
Yeah. As they lost 30 pounds to wrestle.
Yeah, right.
So would we need I guess my question would be, how do we bring this back?
So this could be something that we bring back to our committee as future planning. That's why it's really just for discussion. We're not taking the action on 710 here, but we would just be, if we want to bring it back, we can bring it back to a future meeting. We can talk about it, start drafting some language. bringing back what we talked about before, because we did have some drafted language that we were starting to work on. So it'd really
I
be
think
just
we
a
should.
discussion on that. Okay. Would you like to make a motion, Ms. Kapik?
Yes, I will make.
Oh,
a
well, I
motion.
guess we don't have to really make a
Oh,
motion.
I
It's
guess
just-
it's, yeah, I was, but yes, I would like to see it back on a event, a future
I'll just
event.
add that for future meeting.
Yeah.
All right. Any other discussion on 710? Well, we can bring that back to the next meeting and start talking some language, kind of decide from there if we want to move forward with doing anything else.
Kate, when we did this before and it came up, did we find out what, I think there was some information on surrounding states. I think, I don't know if Paul brought that up, but we did have, it would be interesting to have that data as well when we do bring this up to the board of just having kind of a spreadsheet of what the nearby states and our neighboring states are doing with regards to their age limit.
Perfect. I'll add that to bring back to our next discussion as well. I know Ryan brought in the CIFs and we were looking at that and their cutoff. We might have had a second one, but I'll bring everything back that we talked about the first time, and then I'll get some additional neighboring states data to see what they have.
Thank you.
Anything else on 710? All right. Moving on to item number 9, future planning. Any other regulations that we want to take a look at that have been in discussion that anyone's brought to your attention, or any other things for our future meetings?
For athletic eligibility,
Say that again?
based on rules and regulations.
Any rules, regulations? Yeah.
I want to talk about and bring up CIT and some regulations based on that. I know that I'm fighting our district because I'd like to put some guidelines on CIT with regards to granting CIT kids complete athletic eligibility at any school they want to go to. I have a problem with that, and our district and we have certain coaches and community members that are completely taking advantage of that. And of course, I'm fighting that 100%. So I'm the bad guy, looking like I don't want to give kids opportunities and so forth. But you can clearly see in some cases in our district where a kid is truly a CIT kid and where a kid is truly not a CIT kid. But as soon as that word is mentioned, it's off limits and athletic eligibility is gained. So I want to look at some ways around that. I have been having meetings with our district regarding some possible changes with that, with lower level eligibility, which we've always given at the school site, but any kid that wants varsity eligibility would have to have some kind of a hearing or whatever that we could at least for athletic participation, at least look at that. And according to the national information and Vito and all that stuff, there is some stipulations in there that athletic departments can provide additional requirements for athletic participation. And our district has not listened to that up until recently. So I think it's something we need to kind of take a look at and look at what schools are doing, especially in Clark County and Washoe County, because I don't think it happens that much in the rural areas because there's only one school. So that's where the kid goes. But I think that just needs to be brought up.
Okay, we'll add that to next time. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to look at the possibility of exploring some type of oversight between kids going from 8th grade to 9th grade. And we're in a unique situation up at Whittel where we have a state line that separates us from South Tahoe High. And even before I got up here, we're losing kids between that 8th grade and 9th grade year. They go to Zephyr Cove Elementary from kindergarten through 5th. They come to Whittel Middle School 6 through 8, and then they bolt to South Lake. And there's no way to stop them. I mean, the way they're able to, from what I understand, and I'm not absolutely positive, if they can show an address in California, if they can show 10 hours of work, the parent, or if they just pay the tuition, which from what I understand is like 10 to 12 grand, they can enter South Tahoe High.
Really?
Yeah. So if you look at probably their rosters, I mean, you'll see multiple kids that probably went K through 8 here in Zephyr Cove. And so we're going to continue to lose kids like this. We just did count day today. We had 14 eighth graders last year. We have 10 freshmen this year. So we lost 4. 4 is a lot for us, 4 kids. They haven't started yet at South Tahoe, so I have no idea where these kids went. But it'd be interesting next week if they show up on any rosters. But is there any way we can control this and eliminate this influx going to South Tahoe, and I don't know if Incline and North Tahoe have the same issue. Because I haven't heard. I know they're in the same division or level. They're both 2A, so they're pretty similar. They compete against each other. We're 1A, South Tahoe's 3A. So kids automatically go because there's more opportunity over there. There's more sports. We'd be able to provide the sports if the kids would stay, but we can't keep them. We beg and beg and beg. So I don't know if there's a way to check on 9th grade eligibility or where their feeder school was. If that's all on the other school, like I don't know.
Doesn't that get down to a residency issue, Kate?
Yeah, so the issue here though is that our regulations and the way Activate is set up, they're in 9th grade. They've moved between 8th and 9th grade. They're not required to provide a document of abandonment. And if both parents are together, schools approve those 9th graders. So they could give not great proofs of address and the school's just like, oh yeah, that looks good. You're enrolled here. You're approved. They're not coming through a district or the NIAA for approval because they're considered non-transfers since our regulations start in 9th grade. I can tell you in Clark County, when we see a student that has not been enrolled at the feeder school at the same address, we require additional documentation. We go above and beyond in Clark County to give the document of abandonment. But that can still be missed, again, if that doesn't come to the Clark County office, if it's something school is approving and they miss it and they don't see that a move has happened between 8th and 9th grade. So that's some of it's on the schools to do their due diligence and make sure the proof of address is good and all that comes to them is appropriate. But I think that's a good conversation that we can have at the next meeting about looking at our regulations and do we need to change it so that every 9th grader is considered a transfer and submitted, and that's a lot of extra work on a lot of people. Or is there just something that we can tweak if, there's certain circumstances where a move, maybe a question is added where a move has happened and then they get submitted or things like that. So definitely a good conversation that we can have in the next meeting about some of those changes.
Yeah, we're not only talking we're talking 2 different school districts and 2 different states.
Right.
So California kids cannot come to a Nevada school without showing a Nevada address. It's not like that over there. Yep. So that's another.
Yep.
Jim, the problem you're going to have is that South Lake Tahoe is getting the best of your best kids, and they're not.
Right now, I take any kid.
I know that, but you'll take any kid, but they won't take any kid. If you were sending them over knuckleheads and that kind of stuff, they would be the first to be saying, no, you can't come back here and go back to your zone school or go back to your state school. But because these kids are good kids and they're athletes and that kind of stuff, there's no way South Tahoe is going to say no.
Yeah, but they're not only taking our better kids, they're taking, there's many kids that are going over there and are getting cut. So if they try to come back here, they're done for 180 days.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, the only way we could help you is to waive that rule and say, okay, hey, you get cut from a California school, come back to your state school and you can play. I mean, that's the only thing that we could do, and that's against all of our regulations. So,
And we tell them too, we straight out say, look, if you do that, you can't come back. Or you can, but you're not gonna play.
yeah, you'll have to sit out 180 days.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll add that for the next meeting. We'll continue this conversation then. Anything else for future planning? All right, item 10, public comment. This time provides an opportunity for citizens to address the committee about any matter not on the agenda. Items raised during this portion of the agenda cannot be deliberated or acted upon. Should a member of the public wish to speak on a matter not listed on the agenda, it is asked that that person please complete a green public comment card and submit it to the committee chair prior to the opening of this item. A limit of 3 minutes per person or 5 minutes for the spokesperson of a particular group may be imposed. It is requested that comments be directed to the committee as a whole. Comments that are determined to be irrelevant, repetitious, offensive, inflammatory, willfully disruptive, or deemed to be personal attacks will not be permitted. Is there anybody in the office, Tim or Tia?
No,
for
there is
public
not.
comment? Okay. I have many emails, but I don't see anything that specifically says that it is for this. So I'm going to say I have nothing in my emails. Anybody else have anybody wishing to do public comment? Okay, item 11, adjournment. I will adjourn this meeting at 10:34. Thank you all so much. And we